everybody, it's Emma's World. I'm Emma, and I'm here with you today with a great guest coming up. His name is Robert To Teras, and he is a composer whose work has been seen in a brand new movie called The Walk. And we're going to be talking to him about that. I think it's really fun. I've never talked to a music composer for movies yet, so this is my first. But before we get into anything, please check out our website. It's www.itsemmasworld.com. That is everything that it is Emma's World about. You'll be able to see all of our past guests. You'll be able to see what we got going on. You'll be able to get to all of our social media links. There's so much to do there, so please go check that out when you get a chance. So I think you guys are ready to talk to our guest today. So let's get him on. He's right here. His name is Robert To Teras again. He's a composer whose work has been seen in a brand new movie called The Walk. He's also had his work in Netflix, HBO, TNT, Bravo, Showtime, and Nickelodeon. That's a lot of neat networks. So welcome to the show, Robert. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am glad you're here. And like I said, you're the first composer I've ever had on my show, especially anybody that had their work in a television show or movie or anything. So this is really exciting for me.
Well, I'm honored. That's exciting. I hope I live up to expectations.
Oh, I'm sure you will. We just love art here. We love people that can express themselves and honestly do it for a living. And that's really what I love to talk to my guests about is, how did you get to where you are? I mean, you had to start off somewhere. I'm sure you had some type of musical background. So tell us your story, because your story, I'm sure you've had some walls that you hit and you had to overcome them. I'm sure that you've had people say you couldn't do it. I'm sure that you had people say you could, and your story can inspire others. So tell us how you got into all of this.
Yeah, all those things, you can't do it, you can do it, you're terrible, you're great. Those things you hear on a daily basis, all of them together. So you have to love what you're doing. You have to absolutely love it. Otherwise, this is not the job for you. I started as a child. I started playing piano at 3, I think, and guitar at like 6 or 7, because there was this cool kid in my elementary school who played guitar, and he had a gold Les Paul, and I just thought he was the coolest kid ever. So I wanted to play guitar naturally, and it stuck. And I played piano and guitar all through high school, and then went to college for music. I didn't stay in college for music very long. I started playing in bands. I was in New York City. So the allure of the city sort of beat the allure of a classroom, fortunately and unfortunately. So I started playing in bands around New York City, playing guitar in bands, and then made some headway, got some attention, and then boom, the band broke up. And then I moved to Europe for a few years, which was totally random and having nothing to do with music. And then I came back and I became a singer-songwriter. And as a singer-songwriter, I ended up traveling around the country, playing in Borders Books. Remember Borders Books?
Oh, yeah.
And so Borders Books, there was a time, I guess maybe this is why there are no more Borders Books, but there's a time when it actually paid really well to play in the Borders Books. If you were a solo singer-songwriter, you could make like, this is in like the late 90s, early 2000s, you could make like $300-400 a night playing in the Borders Books, and I would book them all around the country. So I would just get in my car and drive all over, play Borders Books and sell CDs, and did that for a while. And then I met the woman of my dreams and had to figure out a way not to live in my car playing those kind of gigs anymore. So I've always loved television and movies. That's always been like a second love of mine next to music. So I thought maybe I could combine those things. And then we moved to Los Angeles, and man, it's a road, I got lucky enough to meet somebody who helped me get an assistant job to a composer. And then I got another assistant job to a composer, and then I got fired, but not because of anything I did, but because just they didn't have the budget to keep me, because the business can be up and down. That was sort of the first lesson in the business can be up and down. And then I was lucky enough that the guy who fired me, respected my music enough, a composer named Robert Duncan, who there was a job he couldn't do. And he said, hey, do you want to do it? And that was how I got started. And it's one of those things, it's not a straight path upward. It goes like this. It's like, it's a lot of peaks and valleys. But I love the job. And so you can't do it if you don't love it, which is, I guess, how I started. So.
Well, I guess the biggest question I have is, I know when somebody wants to be a director or a producer or an actor or anything like that, how they can get onto a television show or how they can be a part of that, because it makes sense. You audition. Is it the same thing for music? Or how do you even find out how you can get into something like that or audition for, like, let's just say the walk here?
Every job is different. So, sometimes a job comes to you because you know somebody, and not even somebody fancy, but somebody just, somebody, and they need music. And then that maybe leads to something bigger. And then sometimes, you get it because you heard about it and you're like, I want that job. And it was a job I got as a show called Cold Justice that I do, that is right around my shoulder there. I been doing that show for about 7 years now, maybe 8, and we're about to do our 100th episode. And I got that job because I saw a mention of it in the trades that the show was going to happen. And I reached out to their production company. I said, I know what this show sounds like. I just knew what it was going to sound like, and I'd like to send you some music. And someone I knew who worked there said, okay, but I can't really help you beyond that. Like, we haven't even sold the show. And they liked the music. And so there never was another composer in contention. Everything is different. So yes, you can audition for stuff. I've definitely, they call it demoing. So you give them a demo of your music. If they like it, they might ask you to write to a scene in the movie. So they have like a 5-minute scene, and they say, like, well, what would you do with this scene? And there's that. Sometimes they just hire you off your demo. It varies.
Yeah.
But it's similar. It's definitely similar. I guess it's funny. I guess that would be a mystery. It's funny. I guess there was a time that was a mystery, so I can totally understand how that, because you're right, because it doesn't seem like you would just go in and audition like an actor would, but you kind of do.
Yeah. I figured it was still kind of the same process, but it's like, it's a lot different because they would go in and film a quick little scene from it. Whereas you don't know what type of music they're expecting when they're trying to promote this movie and get it stocked up with all the people that they need. So it kind of would make it a little bit more difficult, I would think.
It makes it a lot more difficult, and sometimes you nail it and sometimes you don't, and it's nobody's fault. As a matter of fact, half the time they're looking for you to solve their problem, which can be kind of exhilarating and exciting if you have an idea, but can kind of be a frustrating mystery if you don't. So if you say, like in my case with Cold Justice, I just knew what that was going to sound like. And so I think I solved their problem right away. In the case of some other demos I've done, they didn't know. And so they needed a composer to solve their problem in the way that I did for the people at Cold Justice, but I just didn't nail it in the way that they saw it, or they heard it and they all of a sudden realized that that's not what they wanted. That can happen a lot. And I think that happens to actors too. They walk in, they play the character a certain way, and the casting director's like, oh, that's not what we want. Or maybe the casting director's like, oh my God, you blew our mind. So, I mean, I think it's similar. The problem is with composers, there's only one job. With an actor, you can read for several different parts in a film or television show. With a composer, it's just one. So there's a lot more competition in that way.
I'm going to talk about something that I have known about movies for a long time. And
Sure.
We're going to kind of go back to the original, like, talk radio back in the day, where people had like Dragnet and all these other shows. The way that they made these scenes, because they didn't have people to see, was they had to do it with their voice. They had to change their voice. They had to throw their voices. They had to make up, different types of accents or whatever they needed to do. And they mixed it in with sound effects. Now, with a movie or a television show, the score to those particular shows actually makes the intensity of a scene, or it can put you into a mood quicker to get the response that they're looking for their audience. You know, for
Sure.
instance, like with a horror movie, if you have that little kaleidoscope type of sound coming into the beginning of it, or that, you know, that little soft and then bam sound at the end of it, those are extremely important. So tell me about what it's like to have that type of a task to help take that movie to the new level, because if it's badly scored, it's not going to be as good as they hoped it would be. I know this.
Yes, very true. You are in charge of, you know, if you want to put it crassly, manipulating people's emotions, right? Because that's what movies are doing. They're telling you a story and you're supposed to feel a certain way. And my job is to help that along the best I can with the art form that people most identify with emotion. Music. Music everybody understands music. There are people that don't particularly watch movies or television, not a lot at this point, but I feel like music speaks to everyone in a certain kind of way. So it can be a hard job, because then you don't want to overdo it too. Like, you don't want to be hammy or Mickey Mouse it, as they say, like where you are really, really trying to tell people what to feel. You kind of want to have a little bit of air in there, a little bit of room for people to feel what's happening without too much ham-fistedness. But it can be a really difficult job. It can also be such a fulfilling job when you nail that feeling of the scene, when you get to that authenticity that the producer or director is trying to find. And sometimes they haven't found it in the scene with just the actors, and sometimes they have. But either way, when you can nail that, it's worth every bit of struggle in that way. But you're right, it can be really, really difficult. It's the hardest part of your job. Anybody with training can sit down and make decent music. That's not that everybody in this town is talented. Everybody in Los Angeles who's doing this job is good at it in some way or another. But sometimes things don't land correctly, or you realize this is a very specific kind of task. It's not just, you know, I used to be a songwriter. So when you're a songwriter, you're writing for you. You're writing about your story. You're writing about your imagination, your feelings. This is not what you're doing as a composer. It's collaborative. You're trying to bring out the director and the cast and the producer's emotions, and the writer especially. You're trying to bring out all the things they're trying to say, and you're the last link in the chain before it goes out into the world. And chances are you're the last person they thought about too before they put it together, because they're thinking about everything else, and music is like the last thing. A lot of times because people don't really understand music, or they think they don't, but it's just the last thing they think about. So you have this mammoth job, and sometimes that job is to fix things or save things, and sometimes it's just to complement an already incredible story.
So last question before we go to the break, because when we come back, we're going to be talking about the movie and how you laid it out. Yeah. When you're doing these type of, when you're doing composing for these movies, obviously most of it is not done through with vocals. A lot of it's just done with sound. So right. How do you prepare yourself, and how do you get yourself to put that music to that scene to make it complement what's on film?
You know, that's an interesting question, in that, you know, no one's ever asked me that before. That's an interesting question. I'm not going to speak for anyone else. I'll speak for me. I tend to, and because I come from a rock band background, and vocals have been and songwriting background, vocals are a really big, important part of the way I see music. And I have even done scores with vocals that don't have lyrics, but that have a human voice in the score. One of my first jobs was to do that, actually. And that was my idea, because I was so used to that dynamic that I leaned on it a bit, like, because I come out of rock bands and so on and so forth. So one of my first scoring jobs, I was like, oh, let's do some vocals in here, almost like, it's a song that never gets started. Or it starts, but it never gets going because the actual vocals don't come in, or the actual lyrics don't come in. But so my feeling is that every instrument is basically trying to imitate the human voice. The human voice is the ultimate musical instrument. There is no better musical or more expressive musical instrument. Every instrument is trying to do that. That's why you say, oh, that guy on guitar, he really sings when he plays. Like, you know what I mean? That's why you use that phrase when someone can really play. He's making that saxophone sing. And so I think of music that way. I think of it as all kind of singing. So as I'm saying this, I'm not sure if it's going to make sense, but to me, I almost don't see a difference in at least what I'm trying to do. What I'll end up doing might be different, but what I'm trying to do is give everything that human expressive quality. Does that make sense?
Totally, total. That's actually powerful. That's a powerful statement, actually.
Yeah, well, that is how and that's a great question. And I've thought about that a lot, and that is exactly what I'm trying to do, is trying to make everything sing.
Well, Robert, we are going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after this to talk about the movie and see how you scored it and kind of get your take on what the movie's about. So don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back in about 2 minutes. All right, guys, we are back, and I have Robert To Teras on the line. We said earlier that he is a composer whose work is about to appear in the movie called The Walk. We're going to be talking about The Walk in this segment here. He's also had his work on Netflix, HBO, TNT, Bravo, Showtime and Nickelodeon, some really big networks that I'm sure everybody's heard of. So we're going to talk to him about the movie now, and I think this is going to be a really fun experience, and hopefully you guys will want to go see it just to hear his work on top of it. So tell us a little bit about the movie, The Walk. What's it about?
So in the 1970s in Boston, in 1974 specifically, public schools were still segregated. And so not by law, but it just happened to be that way. And so one of the things they did is they decided to bus kids from different neighborhoods, because a lot of times neighborhoods are segregated as well, to different schools out of their neighborhood to desegregate the schools. So that's the background. Now, what The Walk is The Walk takes place during that time, in the very beginning of that time, when that's about to happen. And we see a Black family that lives in Roxbury, which is the Black neighborhood, and a white family that lives in South Boston, or Southie. And the daughter in the Black family is about to be bused to Southie, and in the white neighborhood, the daughter is going to stay in Southie, but her father has to protect the Black kids as they come into Southie. And he starts to question his own racism and deal with his own issues with race and the people he knows, and the sort of provincialism of living in such a small place where basically everybody was the same. And so, and it became a huge thing in real life. I mean, there were riots, it was a big sweeping social change that was happening. And so what The Walk does is it boils it down to people, and it's a small story about two families and how they get caught up in and contend with this big sweeping social change.
I have seen videos about something like that down in, I believe it was Mississippi or Alabama. I can't remember which one. And it was very intense to watch at it. And it was actually live footage. So it wasn't even like something that they put actors to. So right. I would think that for this type of a movie, you're going to have a bunch of different emotions. You're going to have people that are going to be angry. You're going to have people that are going to be compassionate. You're going to have people, especially the people that are involved going to that school, they're going to probably feel fear. They're going to probably feel a little animosity. And and other things like that, because they don't know how they're going to be receptive. You know, kids are a little bit different than adults were. So, you know, maybe they wouldn't have been as bad for the child inside the school as it would be going outside the school into it. So with those
and there's a
emotions,
moment like that in the movie where, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's a moment like that in the movie where something turns out not like you think, and where it's, and there's also a moment in the movie where the kids actually have taken up the sins of the parents and have some of the same sort of racist feelings that the parents do.
sure.
So yeah, so it examines sort of the full range of what the reactions can be.
So with that type of a score, let's just take us the scene when they're going to when they're going into the school. I don't know if you actually scored that or not. You may have. What are some of the things that you'd want to put together in that music to give that suspense and get people like all worked up for that when they're watching that scene, to give that emotion that they need?
There is a scene like that towards the end of the movie, and it's not giving anything away to tell you there's a scene like that because it's historical. Yeah. And boy, that's a scene filled with 10,000 different emotions. It's a scene filled with fear and anger and hatred on both sides in a way, because on the side of the kids in the bus, there's a kid who's just angry that he has to be put in this situation. So there's a whole lot of stuff happening there. And I think one of the things you have to do is, you know, we all have pieces of music that we love that make you feel 20 different things at the same time. You have to, so you don't have to try to put those 20 different things in there at once. I think you have to emotionally play it like it affects you. And so for me, the way that when I scored that scene, the thing I was thinking is, what am I really feeling watching this? Obviously, there's all this surface emotion, but what I'm really feeling watching it is the tragedy of it all. That ultimately life is so short and we have so little time, no matter, even if we're given the maximum, you know, it's still not enough. And there's a tragedy in that we spend so much of our lives in situations like this, whether they're big or small, contentious, hateful, anger, racist, you know, misunderstandings and things like this, manipulations, things like this that make us not able to live our best lives. And so that's honestly how I played that scene, which is there's a tragedy to this, because there was a lot of violence happening, people rocking a bus, people wanting to fight, people wanting to flee. So there's a lot of kinetic energy. And you don't want to play that like, because what you see on the screen is kind of action, right? You see all these things happening, but that's not really what's happening emotionally. What's happening emotionally is tragic. It's sadness because that people have to spend their lives like this. Even the people that are hateful are also tragic figures because they've either been swept up in something or have chosen to, or don't have enough information, or just for whatever reasons people can be awful. That's still a tragedy. So I played that scene for the tragedy of it, not so much for the kinetic energy of it, if that makes sense.
It's totally makes sense. I mean, I've seen people that have gone through and like on a movie, there's like everything's blowing up around them and it's going, you could see the hate, you could see the drama, and it's a really soft, mellow, dramatic song going underneath it. It's almost peaceful, and it's like, it makes sense. It does. It totally makes sense, and that's what I like about stuff like that.
There's a scene in that Quentin Tarantino movie, Reservoir Dogs, that I think everybody knows, where Michael Madsen cuts off the guy's ear, and and they put that Stuck in the Middle with You song in there. And really what you're doing there, he's doing something terrible and disgusting, and he's a psycho. But you realize everybody's the hero of their own story. And in his mind, he's having a ball and he's having fun. And that's why that song is playing. And that's the juxtaposition and that can be a great thing about music in a movie, whether it's scored or a song, is that what are you playing with this music? What are you doing with it? And in my case, it was, this whole thing is a tragedy. And so that has to be understood. It can't be understood as like, oh, there's fighting, there's yelling, there's screaming, there's noise. So it's not an action scene. It's not an action movie. It's something terrible is happening.
I know from a couple movies, one of my favorite songs is A Summer Place, which is, very classic from the 1960s. And then you also have songs like The Entertainer and was it something Chariots or something like that. All of these songs had a score in a movie. Now, those are considered, I would consider them, even though they may not be, more of like the old-fashioned style, whereas today, I don't know if it would sound like that inside of a movie necessarily. So knowing that this took place in the 1970s, did you have to try to keep some of those scores that would be something similar to that, or it didn't matter?
No, that didn't matter. I mean, I didn't want to lean too much on the period too much in any way. I did do a few things that were a little 70s-ish, but I think if you do that right now, you evoke a lot of nostalgia, and I didn't want to evoke nostalgia. It's why Stranger Things is so great. Like, if you've seen Stranger Things, because the score is like 80s synth pop, right? So it brings you back to a time and place. But that's a fun Netflix show, as dark as it gets. It's a fun show. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to give people a great feeling going back. I wanted to give them a little bit of an edgy feeling going back. So you have to create a sonic palette that's not going to make people think like, oh, the fun 70s or whatever, because that's not really why we're there, if that makes sense. Totally. The score is more, it's not a horror score and it's not a horror movie, but it's small leading up to something big. And so that's kind of how I played it.
Now, with this particular movie, I'm sure every movie has this. You're going to have your easy scenes that were it just came out of your brain like it's flying. And then there's going to be some, it's like running your head into a wall and it's just like, oh my God, why can't I get this? So what was that scene for you that was the hardest to score, and why?
That's a good question. The hardest, I was talking about the tragic bus scene later on in the movie, because I wanted to get that right. So it took a while. I kept coming back to it.
So you're overthinking it.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get it right. You don't want to overdo it. Like you don't want to do too much. You don't want to be cheesy. This is a real thing. You're looking for authenticity, and I think that when that's the name of the game, you gotta think about things. You gotta take some time. You gotta step away. You gotta go for a walk. You gotta come back to it and make sure that it's the right thing. It's a good question.
So now that you've seen the movie and you've heard all your work, did it give you chills? Did it give you those little goosebumps listening to it?
I always enjoy that, and I saw it in the theater, which was really great. Like, I mean, if people are going to go see it in the theater. It's just so enjoyable to go to the movie theater. It's been so long since I had done that, and it was seeing your own work in the movie theater it can't be beat. Yeah, for sure.
We're like, oh my God, I did that. Oh my God, I did that.
Yeah, I know. I do. I have that even after all this time. I totally have that of like, oh, that's me. So yeah, it's great.
I think the one good thing about your position on the movie is that you don't listen back and say, do I really sound like that?
Yeah. There are times you're like, did I do that? But yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I'd hate to be an actor, boy. I'd hate it.
Well, I'll tell you what, unfortunately, we are running out of time. We got about a minute left before we got to go. So please tell everybody where they can find this movie. I know it's coming out soon, and I'm sure it's going to be on
It's
some
actually
digital
out now.
platforms.
It actually came out. Yeah, it actually came out on Friday. It's in select cities now. Philly. I wish I had the list in front of me. Man, they need to send me that list. But it's around the country, and you can also get it on digital, so on demand. And so it's out now. Yeah, go check it out.
And how can people follow you?
On Twitter, I'm at Robert ToTeras, all one word. And on Instagram, I'm at Robert_ToTeras. And I'm trying to get better at social media. So if you follow me, I'll try to communicate.
We'll grow with you. How's that?
Yes,
All
that'd be
right.
great.
Well, Robert, thank you for coming on and being a great guest today. I learned a lot. This is really fun. I could probably go on and on about this type of thing because I've never talked about it before. So thank you for enlightening me, enlightening our guests. And I hope that they will go check out this movie and see how you brought an extra element to it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Good question.
I'm glad. All right, guys, we are unfortunately at the end of the show, so I got just about a minute left. I encourage you to go check out our website. Again, it's emmasworld.com. Has all of our social media there. Any guests that you missed, no big deal. It's right there. And of course, you can see you can see the live action if you're listening to the radio on YouTube, because we have the same interview there, so you can see our faces. And of course, we will be back again, same time, same places next week. We would love to see you and join us and taking time out of your weekend to be a part of this and learn and grow with us. So again, have a great, safe week. We will be back then. Goodbye.
Like, OMG, you were on TV and junk.